Hi everyone, it's Katie and welcome to my channel. Today we are doing a video that we do every year around this time, and that is an update of my deck collection. Today specifically we're going to be looking at my Oracle deck collection. So essentially we're going to be going through every single Oracle deck I own. I'm going to be showing you some of the cards, talking about what I like about them, my history with them, all of that good stuff, so we can have a look at every deck that I own. I'll also be uploading very soon my full tarot deck collection video and update to that. So if you're interested in that, please stay tuned. Subscribe if you haven't already. These are in no particular order, but let's just dive right in. So the first deck we're going to have a look at is the Sacred Creators Oracle by Chris Ann. This is a really, really pretty little deck. I got it actually this year in a trade. It's a deck that I've been looking at on and off for quite a while, but the postage and everything just made it a bit too expensive for me and what I wanted to spend on it. So getting the opportunity to trade for it was just perfect for me. And the colours are just so pretty. I know there have been different versions of this, and I think I have the first edition, but I'm not entirely sure. I really like the messages on here. I think they're really unique and not something we see on a lot of affirmation sort of style decks. The colours are obviously a big appeal, and then these kind of interesting little doodles, or whatever you might want to call them, that accompany the cards. I think they're just really great. It does come with a large kind of hard box and book, which are great. Everything about this is just kind of really top-notch quality and all of that sort of stuff. But for me, I find I prefer not to use the guidebook too much, just because there's like so much information. Like the guidebook is massive. You get multiple pages for each card, and for me, as someone who can just get caught in my head a little bit too much, I prefer just enjoying the simplicity of these cards without getting too in my head about them. And I mean, clearly there's plenty you can do with these from an intuitive standpoint. I personally really like using these cards at the end of a tarot reading. I do draw kind of just one at the beginning of a day if I just want like a little affirmation or something. But yeah, I do find I really like pulling them like a card at the end of a tarot reading. That's been probably the way I've used this deck the most, and it's been really good. Next up is the Amethyst Oracle by Jessica Bott, which is kind of the companion or sister deck, Oracle deck, to the Idiosyncratic Tarot, which is one of my favourite tarot decks. This Oracle deck I certainly have not used nearly as much as I used the Idiosyncratic this year. It looks very similar. Like, if you know what the Idiosyncratic looks like, it looks like these cards could fit right in. The borders, everything about them is the same. The artwork's very, like, pretty much the same as well. So it definitely has the same sort of feel. I love this card. But I don't know what it is. I just haven't really used this anywhere near as much. I do really like it though. And I'm not ready to part with it just because I want to kind of push myself to play with it more. And I suppose that part of me that loves the Idiosyncratic Tarot so much would really love to love this as well. It's beautiful, and I really just love this artwork. I think it's really refreshing in its simplicity and how easy it is to make out the images. I like I love this resistance and this brick wall. I think that's great. It's a really well thought out but very simple deck, and I love it. I think it's really effective. Just for some reason I haven't worked out how to fit it in to my little world of divination and tarot and oracle. I'm not ready to give up yet though. Isn't that sweet? Next is a very special deck. It is the Victorian Flower Oracle. This was very generously given to me as a gift, which was pretty incredible. This is also a companion deck, Oracle deck, to one of my favourite tarot decks, and that is the Fantastic Menagerie by Bubba Studios. This uses the artwork of J.J. Granville, and it's really fun. I have had a lot of fun actually with this deck. I had the Floret Oracle before this, which I think is a great alternative, and I did really like it, but I just didn't feel like I needed both. And I found actually, I thought I would just be using this solely in conjunction with the Fantastic Menagerie, but actually I found myself using this deck on its own quite a bit, and I like pulling more like 3 cards, which is unusual for me in Oracle decks. I tend to be one of those people who just does like a daily draw with an Oracle deck, or pulls an extra card at the end of a tarot reading. Whereas with this deck, it's very much become a standalone for me, which I think is really cool. And yeah, I do prefer to draw 3 cards and do a little reading that way with it. The art is obviously beautiful. I love the colours, just everything about it. It's just really impressive, I think. It does come with a little white book, which actually does have a surprising amount of information, which comes in handy, but isn't necessary. The next is a deck that has been with me for quite a while, but that I don't really use. And if you watched my decluttering my collection, or culling my collection videos, you'll know that I'm pretty sure I ended up thinking I was going to get rid of this deck, primarily for the reason that I just don't use it. But when it came time to like putting it up for sale, I just couldn't quite do it. This deck was one of the first, I think it was the first Oracle deck my mum ever bought me, and she got it for me while she was in Paris on my mum and dad's wedding anniversary. So it's this little French Oracle deck, and this backing is one of my favourites. I love it. It's a really sweet little deck, and I love the colours, and the artwork's really lovely. And like the language barrier isn't really an issue. I mean, like, this is pretty clear. You can figure it out pretty easily what the title is supposed to be. And even if you can't, like, the images speak quite clearly on their own. I don't know what it is about it. It's just not an Oracle deck I've ever really gone to. I've used it a handful of times, mostly with mum, but it's just not an Oracle deck. Oh, empty card. It's just not a deck that, you know, calls to me, that makes me want to pull it off the shelf. But it's also a deck that I've had trouble letting go of. So it's still here for now. It's still as cute and colourful as ever. Still not really sure what I'm doing with it, but it was a really nice gift and pretty special from mum. Next is one of my most used decks, although I don't really know if it counts as an Oracle deck per se. It's the Elements of Recovery by Beverly King. This is a little deck, and I suppose it is an Oracle deck, that is based on the principles of the 12 Steps, Alcoholics Anonymous. And as someone who is 6 years sober, but has had problems with alcohol abuse, I was just really drawn to this deck, and I have actually found it hugely helpful and inspiring for my problems around substance abuse, but also I found it really helpful for other issues I've had, especially around like things like perfectionism and stuff like that. So this has been a deck that I've actually used a lot, especially when it comes to, I don't know, my own work, stuff I gotta work on. I use it a lot for journaling. The spreads that I use with it, I always learn so much and get so much out of it, and I think it's such a clever little deck. Such a helpful little deck. And like the art is nothing, you know, revolutionary, but it's sweet. These titles were provided by Beverly King. When I ordered the deck, I got sent a PDF, like guidebook basically. This is several years ago now. and I wrote the titles of the cards. They already came with the numbers printed on, but then I wrote the titles on myself with like a permanent marker, just so that I could use them independently of the guidebook a little bit more. Although the guidebook is still great too. So it's a wonderful, wonderful deck if those are sort of issues you've had trouble with. I think it's one of the most significant decks in my collection, even if, you know, I go through phases of using it a lot and then not using it at all. But I've just found it to be hugely beneficial to me overall. So it's an important one. Next is one of my favorite Oracle decks of all time, although I have to admit I didn't use it this year as much as I have in previous years. It's still an incredible deck and one I am just really grateful to have. It is the Life Design cards by Lisa McLaughlin, and they are just stunning. I know these are currently out of print, but what I saw on Lisa's Instagram, I believe she's kind of redesigning them. So they'll be back, but just look different in the future. I love this artwork though. I know her intention is to make this deck look more in line with some of her other Oracle decks, but this is actually by far my favorite of her decks. So that's a little bit sad to me, but you know, you got to do what you got to do as an artist, I suppose. This to me is just one of the most unique and interesting Oracle decks. It's based on the principles of permaculture, but you don't need to know anything about that stuff in order to get a lot out of this deck. It's just incredible though. It does kind of have a suit system. You've probably been able to tell that the backings, they're the same pattern, but different colors, and that indicates different suits. I don't really work with it too much in that way, but I've just found it to be such an incredibly specific and positive and proactive and empowering Oracle deck for me. It's the sort of deck where I just have really kind of weird, give you goosebumps synchronicities with, which is just always fun. And I just love how like these keywords or these messages are very, yeah, they're very action based, a lot of them. And they're also just really unlike most other Oracle decks, which I think is great. The artwork for me is also really evocative, and these colors, oh, I just love some beautiful rich colors, especially like blues and pinks and purples, and I don't know, I just think it's beautiful. Unlike her other Oracle decks though, we do actually get a guidebook, which I think is great because, as I said, there's actually, with the suits and like the ideas of permaculture, there's a lot actually going on in this little guidebook or in this deck, and so it's great that we kind of get a bit of insight through the guidebook. Her other Oracle decks have just like a message on the back of the cards, which I think works too, but I think with this deck I was really I really appreciated having the guidebook when I was first kind of trying to get my head around these really unique sort of messages. Next is a deck I've been kind of toying around with a little bit lately. It's the Connected and Free Alchemist Oracle by Anna Hugh. I did have this deck, the first edition, when it very first came out, and like I had a lot of fun with it for a while, but there were just some things with it about it that I just kind of struggled with. And one of those main things was that I just didn't always feel like the artwork, the keywords, and then the messages in the guidebook all aligned. It kind of felt like the book and the meanings were made separately to the images, which kind of bothered me. But then this year I had an opportunity to pick up this deck at a bit of a bargain, so I did, because it is beautiful. It's beautiful. And I don't know, I was just curious to see how I might get along with it now, you know, several years into my practice. I love this card. And there's a lot about it that I do really like. I'm still not sold on whether it's a deck long term for me. I'm not crazy about like the chakra cards in here. They just kind of feel a bit out of place, but then books like, or cards like this are just stunning. So it kind of doesn't always feel, I don't know, like a cohesive deck. Like I love this. And I'm just kind of not really sure how I feel about the deck overall. and like long term being in my collection. But I have been having a bit of fun with it. Now I know that there are different editions of this deck, and I don't know exactly which one I have now, but I know it's not the original, because there are some slightly different cards from when I first had the deck, and I did have the first edition originally. Next up is another deck that I actually did have and then got rid of and then got back, and that's the Flowers of the Night Oracle by Sherilyn Darcy. And this backing has to be my favorite Oracle card backing ever. Sherilyn did send me this independent version of her deck quite a while ago, and I reviewed it and I loved it and all of that was true, but then the Rockpool version came out, the mass-produced version, and I did kind of like a comparison video and determined that, like, yeah, I did like the indie version better, but not like a crazy amount better. And so then an opportunity came up to like trade or something, and like I ended up moving on my indie version. But as time went on, I really started to miss it. So I kind of had my eye out for another copy of the indie version, although I think there was only 100 printed, so it's not readily available. But when stuff like that happens, I'm very patient. Like, I don't know, I suppose I have in the back of my mind that these are just cards. It's not a deal, like a life or death situation. Sure, I'd love to have the deck back, but if I don't, I'll be fine. I have other decks. So I just kind of kept my eye out, and eventually one popped up on Gumtree actually. And so I snagged it, which I was really happy with. So this has come back into my life fairly recently, and it is beautiful. I will say it isn't my favorite of Sherilyn Darcy's oracles. I'll talk about my favorite soon because I do have that one as well. But it is beautiful, and I think it's the most unique of her oracle decks. And her artwork is really interesting. It's unique. Again, I don't want to overuse that word, but it is quite different from a lot of the artwork that we see in oracle decks. It's the lino print style. And I know she pours her heart and soul into her oracle decks, and I think they're beautiful. And I do think with this deck in particular, there's something really, I don't know, unsettling and magical about it. And I suppose that's the nighttime aspect of it. It's kind of almost a little surreal. I don't know. I think it's amazing though. It's beautiful. And that backing, I mean, you can't go past that backing. It's amazing. So my favourite Sherilyn Darcy oracle is actually the Australian Wildflower reading cards. This is published by Rockpool, and it comes with an amazing full colour guidebook and all of the things that we can expect from Rockpool Publishing. And these cards are just gorgeous, and I spoke about this. This was one of the decks that made it to my top 5 oracle decks of 2019 because I used it so much, and connecting with this deck really helps me connect with the Australian landscape, and it's a deck that I take on trips, on road trips, especially those I do with my mum, which I think is just really fun. And you know, when we're out staying in the bush or something, I think it's just like there's nothing better than pulling one of these cards in the morning and doing a little reading with my mum about our day and how we can approach the day, and then like kind of paying attention to the flowers around us as we're walking, you know, going for a bushwalk and seeing what we can see. And I don't know, it's just, there's something really special about this deck to me. And perhaps that is in large part because I'm in Australia. But I do also just think it's stunning. Like, it's absolutely beautiful. Look at that, it's gorgeous. Like, these colours are just so rich and intense. I spoke about it quite a bit in my favourites video, so I'll leave a link to that below if you'd like to see that in my top 5 favourite oracles of 2019. But this was certainly up there in that list. It ranked high. This is an old favourite of mine. It's the Flowers of Love Oracle. I have done a little review on this one, and it comes with a larger box and guidebook. This is such an interesting little deck, a really unique little one. And again, I kind of go through phases of using it a lot and then not using it much. But basically there's myths and fables and stories attached to each one of these cards. And then the different coloured borders indicate different suits or stages of love or relationship. It's a really interesting deck with a lot of layers. And so even though it looks so simple, there's actually a lot going on and a lot you can do with it. I found it really interesting and fun to play around with. This was another gift from my mum, actually. She's great. And this is probably, of the Oracle decks she's bought me, I think this would be my favourite. And the one that I've used the most. I just think it's great. And I love these colours. I think the artwork is really cute, really sweet. I love the stories they tell, and the guidebook really kind of breaks down the stories and the messages of those stories. And they're not all just like the really, really well-known obvious stories too. There are some of those mixed in, but I don't know, I think there's a really good variety, or a pretty good variety anyway, of stories that they've chosen. And some of the cards are actually quite dark in terms of the message and the story that have been selected, which I think is interesting. But all of the cards are really beautiful. I've actually had a lot of fun pairing this deck with some tarot decks, including the Gill Tarot, interestingly. So it gets a good workout in my collection, especially in kind of the warmer months, I think. It's a beautiful little deck. Next we have another deck with a great backing. It's the Awakened Soul Oracle by Ethany. This is another deck I did a review on, and it's also another deck that made it to my favourite decks of 2019. It's a gorgeous deck, and for all the reasons I've already stated in my review and all the videos I've done of this deck, it's beautiful. And I love how practical it is, how down to earth it is, and also, in particular, I love Ethany's guidebook. I think she's done a great job of making it a very practical, empowering, proactive guidebook of what can you do, what can we think about, not just, I don't know, it just feels really, yeah, proactive and empowering are the two words I kind of think of when I'm using this deck. And I always feel kind of buoyed. I feel a little pumped up, amped up. Like I got Ethany cheering me on in the background or something. I don't know, it's just, it's a really fun deck. It has a playful lightheartedness to it, but it's not too, I don't know, what some people might call fluffy. It's definitely got a depth to it. Next we have my favourite Oracle deck of the year. It's the Saltwater reading cards by the one and only Laura Bowen. Laura Bowen is probably my favourite Oracle deck creator. I just adore her two decks. And this one I'd always liked, but recently it's kind of forced its way to the top of my list, which I wasn't really expecting. I have done a review of this a couple of years ago, and Laura did send this to me as a gift, primarily because I was talking about her other decks so often. That she sent me this not long after it was released. And it's just stunning. Like, are you kidding me? These colours. Laura puts so much intention into her work. And she explains in the guidebook that the dots in her paintings in these cards are made using the tips of feathers of seabirds that she's discovered on her walks along the beach, for example. Like, are you kidding me? Like, just that energetic infusion into these cards, I think it's palpable. You can feel it. Like, these aren't just images that were whipped up on a whim for the sake of adding into a deck to make money. There's so much purpose and dedication behind these, like everything that Laura does, but her Oracle decks feel like this, I don't know, like this labor of love that we've been granted access to. I don't know, maybe I'm romanticizing it all a bit too much, but they're just really special to me. And this deck in particular has been incredible for me this year. I've used it so much, more than any other deck. And it's just given me so much. It's incredible. And these colours, I just can't get over these colours. And I love her takes on kind of like the kind of scarier sort of cards. I don't know. She just has really interesting keywords and associations that feel very personal. Like she hasn't just looked up what the lionfish means in a correspondence book, you know? It's like she's established these meanings herself through observance and experience. And then of course we have the original, the big sister, the Dreamtime reading cards by Laura Bowen. These were her first deck, at least published by Rockpool. And this is the deck that I fell in love with originally. And it's still, gosh, it's such a strong deck. It has such a presence. It's really quite intense, it can be. And so that's why I love the two decks, because they feel so different. You know how some Oracle deck creators, they kind of just feel like they come out with a bunch of decks that sort of feel the same? And maybe you have a preference, but I don't know, you can almost mix and match cards and, you know, as long as they had the same backing, they would all fit together as one Oracle. The Saltwater reading cards and the Dreamtime reading cards feel really different. They feel, I mean, they still feel like they came from Laura. They still feel like, you know, consistent with her voice. But in terms of what she's captured between the two, they feel really distinct. And I love that. So thank you all so much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed this video. Before we go, of course, I have to thank my wonderful patrons over on Patreon for sponsoring this video and supporting me for the last several months in making my videos and everything I do on my channel. Your support is so very much appreciated, and a particular big extra special thank you to Tracy Timmerman, Laurie and Lynette Brown. Thank you all so much. Don't forget too that the tarot deck collection video will be up very soon, so stay tuned for that, and I will talk to you all again soon. So much love. Bye.